Yeah, okay, first of all, thank you all my guests for coming to my presentation. And I am Melody, and I'm going to try to introduce my paper in 9 minutes. So, yes, first of all, artists. When you see this word, what are some first names that come to your mind? Like Da Vinci, Van Gogh, Monet, Picasso? But today we're going to talk about a group of people who are very different, who are said to be the most influential international movement of the post-war era. So, when I was 10 years old, I went to Yayoi Kusama's exhibition for the first time in my life, and little did I know that I'll still be talking about her in high school. I didn't learn until later, with a lot of studying in history and gender studies, that Yayoi Kusama was one of the first feminist artists, and she also protested in Manhattan against the Vietnam War. So the 1950s, with the post-war prosperity in America, there's all this American dream scenery going on. However, going into the 60s and 70s, everyone was trying to find something different, something new, and trying to break the conventions from the 1950s. So in art, there's minimalism, there's pop art, there's the Beat generation writing books, there's feminist movements, protests for an ERA, there's the feminist mystique written, there's the civil rights movement. And also there are the feminist art movement, who are a group of feminist artists. And I was always wondering if the pacifism and the feminism meet, what is at their intersection? Which led to my essential question, which is how did these women artists respond to the collision of the Vietnam War and the second wave feminism? Which led to my paper, Vulnerability and Identity. So today I will be specifically introducing 4 sets of different artists and their artworks. Throughout my analysis of the specific details and visual content of these artworks, I found out that these artists, they specifically use a repetitive motif of the vulnerability of their body, especially the female body, in their works to demonstrate the inherent patriarchy in war and also their combat for their own identity. So what? I have been contemplating that these women constantly use their body on show and also objectify themselves into an artwork. Are they essentially breaking free from the patriarchal system in that they are taking back the power to control their own body and making choice of their own bodies? Or are they essentially staying in the patriarchal system in that they still have to focus on their own bodies and that's the only topic they can focus on? And also, can we even judge them from our point of view nowadays? So I'll be starting with some visual art. This is Martha Rossler, and she believed that the home is where the war is conceptually located. These are some of her iconic works, Cleaning the Drapes and Red Stripe Kitchen. These are both from her series, House Beautiful, Bringing the War Back Home, which are a series of protest art against the Vietnam War. In these series, she tried to create a literal living room war in which she wanted to bring the there and the here together. She used journalistic photos of the soldiers, like here, and also a really suburban, idealized American living room setting she got from magazines. As in here, and also here, this woman is dressed in like very stereotypical 1960s style. She wanted to combat the idea that is often perpetuated by the media that women at home are living in a haven in a heartless world. And she wanted to say that actually these women at home felt absolutely horrified and that they're actually feeling in a different way that the media is downplaying them. Also, by using these common pictures, she wanted her audience to actually step into the rooms and feel like what these women were feeling and how close the danger were to them. She also said that her works are absolutely feminist in that she is not only depicting the violence in war, but also the violence women receive when they are restricted at home. Also, there are artists who use abstract contortions of the bodies. This is Nancy Sparrow, and these two of her works are called the Female Mom from her War series. A lot of her works are done with indignation as a mother, even before she started the War series. And as she describes here, right here, this series is filled with her anger and also women dying and bombs dropping. So by depicting these female figures that turn into bombs, she wants to depict how women are both victimized and brutalized by the war, as they are literally destroyed and split into pieces by these bombs from the war, but they also turn into the bombs themselves. Also, she is an artist who often looks for female figures from magazines, films, and other media she sees, and she would cut these figures out and carve them and print them repeatedly onto her artworks. And as here you can see, this vicious head with a red blood stroke sticking out is constantly used in these works and many of her other works. So on the surface level, these red blood strokes literally represent the violence that the women received during the war, as they're literally spilling blood. But also, many curators have described these flows as a menstrual flow, in which that the violence that women received in their daily life are merged together with the brutality from war. Also, these red strokes could be described as tongues for women. As she said, I was literally sticking out my tongue to a woman's silence, victimized and brutalized. So there are also performance arts. And in the 1960s and 70s, performance art was at its height. This is Yoko Ono, and she said, there's a whole world that could exist by being peaceful. And this is her work for peace, the cut piece, as she was sitting in the center of Carnegie Hall on the floor, all dressed and in silence, while a scissor is beside her. And throughout the performance, she only sits there, and her audience can come up at any time and cut a piece of her clothing from her. So she described it as, hey, you're doing this to a woman, we're all in it, and don't bite, let it happen. So curators have described this as a violent protest in that Yoko Ono, literally just by showing her body as a woman and just by becoming a female artist at that time, is actually really against the social norms at that time and expectation for women and women artists. Also, it is Yoko Ono's message against the Vietnam War in that she wants to tell her audience, like, hey, how long can you sit there and wait and witness this crime happen until you come up and do something to stop this or stop the Vietnam War? She also take it a step further in that she said, when someone is cutting you, they cut in a straight line geometrically, but your body is a curve, so that's straight, and life's like that sometimes. And also, most artists want to give, but she wants people to take from her. So throughout this performance, by letting her audience participate in her performance, she wants to encourage her audience to think about their own identity in a time of turbulence. I'll talk about another woman who also sat and protested, and that's Judy Chicago. She sat in some smoke, which she called the atmosphere. She created this atmosphere because she said, I was absolutely horrified by the masculine landscape and also the masculine ways that people are destroying these landscapes. And by using this smoke, she wants to feminize the landscape and feminize her surroundings. She also said that it is a reference to the practice of sati, when women throw themselves into fire at their husband's funeral. And also, she is literally alluding to the monks who set themselves on fire to protest against the Vietnam War. And also with the smoke, she is referring to how the US Army was using smoke to defoliate their battlefield. So, what can we conclude from them, and how can we answer the essential question? So I believe that although our conception of genders is constantly changing, we cannot only look at them from our perspectives, and that their existence were definitely groundbreaking in that they found freedom to respond to life. And it was something that was unimpeded by the traditional male mainstream. It's also important to notice that even in this time era, which is often pictured as progressives, there are also still diversities in different feminisms, and we cannot characterize all of these women in one category. For example, for these artists, their messages are really radical, even for today, but also they often discuss about their roles in a family, as a mother, or as a wife. Lastly, I found them to be absolutely empowering for artists in their times and also generations to come, in that they are trying to infuse their political stance into their artworks and spread them to the public. In that sense, they have found their voice in the public and society. Thank you.
All right, questions for Melody?
Yes, Mr. Davis.
Hi, Melody. Did you look at how contemporary female artists are influenced by a lot of the artists you mentioned here decades ago? Did you look at any of that, or do you have a sense of how influential they've been, or whether they're receiving enough attention?
Yeah, definitely. So like in their times, they were definitely not receiving enough attention as their male contemporaries were like praised and put into museums. They were actually rejected from many shows in the general public. But in the contemporaries, as for example, the Yayoi Kusama that I talked about in the beginning, she is currently one of the highest selling artists in the world. And also, like, women today are definitely inspired not only by the content of their art, but also the ways that they did art. As like they often use their body art and also performance art, which is a great innovation from their previous years. But also, women has also been looking back to them from like our perspective, in that they're definitely in a more conservative time era, and they receive more inequality. So like people have been considering if they like showing their bodies and like objectifying themselves are actually like empowering for women or not. Yes, Ms.
So it sounds like you thought they did not perpetuate patriarchy on the whole, but I'm wondering if you thought if you have a spectrum there, if you thought some artists were a little more maybe borderline there, or not perpetuating the patriarchy a little bit more than other artists.
Yeah, so I personally think that Martha Rossler's argument is very interesting, because she is one of the artists who believes that like she could like have it all, and also like she believed in like the power of women staying at home. So as she is trying to talk about her own identity, I feel like that's also like her difference with the other artists. Yes.
I'll ask another. I'm curious, since you mentioned Kasana a couple of times, she's got a lot of attention and had a pretty massive show at New York Botanical Garden. I don't know if you've seen that. But how do you feel about an artist like Kasana's work being commodified and in a pretty major way, stripped of some of its meaning, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. I found that very interesting. I was maybe going to talk about it in my conclusion, but like that's too much for my paper. But in the first place, I personally definitely learned about Kusama from social media, which is a very commodified place. So I think like in one sense, it is absolutely great that their works could be publicized to more people and be accessible to more people, and that like if like they're not publicized, like people would probably not know if they're not interested in art. But like Yayoi Kusama right now is like getting a lot of attention and a lot of people know her. So in that sense, it is good. But also, I mean, like, are you talking about like her work, The Narcissist Garden? Yeah. I mean, like that work in its essence is to like make people to look into themselves and consider their own egos, but also social media, for example, or media in general is such a place where like people are trying to create a different image of themselves or like create many fake things or perpetuate fake things. So in that sense, I think it's kind of ironic, or we shall say like she has looked into the essence of society.
Do you think your work has changed from, it started out that she was more of an activist? Do you think that she's still an activist and it's just changed because of like the outside culture, or is it different now, or do you think that her work has changed and is no longer really as radical or as political?
Yeah, I personally feel like it's because her like surroundings has changed. And also, I definitely think that she is like no longer like doing protest art. Like the message from her works are definitely still radical and protesting against many social norms, but like not protest art in this sense. Yeah.
Do you think that the artwork here is a response to political movements, or do you think it helped push political movements? And then they do you think this like modern artwork is pushing social and political movements, or do you think it's a response and reactionary?
Yeah, I personally think that it's actually more of a response to political movements in the first place, and now like there are just like so many movements going on, and there's also many pacifist artists and also many female artists. So in that sense, they're a part of the responding to their society. But as they have become more predominant in the society, and as they have like become a predominant voice, that actually became a force that pushed society forward. Yes, Anita.
You mentioned that we're sometimes limited by our perspective because we live in such a different climate by when these artworks were created. So I was wondering, in your analysis, what are some ways you tailored your perspective into like better understanding the artworks, whether it's like they're seeing other people's comments or like comments from the contemporaries, like what did you think?
Yeah, so like, are you saying like how did I put
how did you
comments
better
for
analyze the artworks?
Yeah, so like for analyzing these artworks, I mostly took from direct quotes from the artists, like as I put on my PowerPoint, all of those are direct quotes from these artists. And also I took from curators' notes from their museum shows, and also some art critics from academic journals. I actually haven't put a lot of like modern reviews of them from this time period.
All right.